is what separates us.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from New York City. I'm Susan Tehrani. First, a look at this hour's headlines. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announces a plan to mobilize more than $75 billion in public and private funds to counter China in the Indo-Pacific. European Union ministers agree to a €2 billion plan to jointly purchase desperately needed artillery shells for Ukraine. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says cooperation with African countries a priority for the Kremlin, assures grain supply to Africa even if Moscow exits the Ukraine grain deal. UK slaps sanctions on more senior officials of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, including financiers and commanders, says the crackdown is on agencies funding the Iran regime's brutal repression. Danny Lee wins Live Golf Tucson Invitational with a 25-foot birdie in a four-way playoff. This is his first victory in almost 8 years and takes home the top prize of $4 million. Former U.S. President Donald Trump braces for what he thinks will be a tough week. Trump has raised calls for protests, saying that he expects to be arrested. He says that he expects the Manhattan District Attorney to unleash criminal charges against him over his role in paying hush money to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Trump claims that he will be arrested on Tuesday. If true, he would be the first former president to face criminal charges, and it could impact his chances of contesting for the White House in 2024. Trump issued a call to action on his social media platform Truth Social, urging his supporters to hold protests. His opponents have termed his call as echoes of calls that led to the January 6 riots. Some reports say that online chat boxes include calls for armed protests to block law enforcement officers. Meanwhile, the New York Republicans Club has announced plans for a protest at an undisclosed location. Some in the Republican Party are also calculating the risk of supporting Trump's latest call. Kevin McCarthy called for calm if Trump is arrested, saying people should not hold protests on this case. His former vice president and a possible contender for the 2024 Republican nominee race, Mike Pence, has already called Trump's attitude during the Capitol riots as being reckless. The case for which Trump may get arrested dates back to 2016, where adult film star Stormy Daniels contacted media outlets in order to sell her alleged instance of encounter with Trump in 2006. But later on, she was allegedly contacted by Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, and Cohen paid her $130,000 to push the story under the carpet. However, this incident is not seen as a crime in many U.S. states, but in New York it is. When Trump reimbursed the amount to Cohen, the record for the payment says that it was a legal fee. And according to prosecutors, this amount to Trump falsifies business records, making it a possible criminal offense here in New York. Okay, for more on this, we are joined by Adele Nazarian. She's a media fellow at the Gould Institute for International Strategy. She's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Adele, thank you so much for joining us on WION. So, you know, this move by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg seems politically motivated, to say the least. Many believe that it's going to be on a misdemeanor charge if Trump gets arrested. Others feel that he won't get arrested. And this is just all, again, a political ploy to get Donald Trump all the way down to the Manhattan courthouse for one reason or the other. What are your thoughts about this whole story?
Thank you. You know, it can go either way, as you said yourself. It could be that there's some inside information that we're not yet privy to that indicates they could very well be looking at arresting him tomorrow. And it could also be a call to arms. But what I will say is that if he is, in fact, arrested tomorrow, I believe it will only solidify and enhance his reelection prospects in 2024. And so I think that him perhaps calling for protests and putting out there on social media through his Truth Social platform that he does anticipate an arrest may also be a way to dissuade any authorities from actually going through with the arrest. So it's very, very tricky to say, especially with all the misinformation, unfortunately, that's being presented out there.
You know, what's interesting is this news came out, and it was according to multiple reports that Alvin Bragg, the district attorney of Manhattan, wants to arrest Donald Trump sometime next week. But then Donald Trump took hold of the story himself and said that I will be arrested on Tuesday. And he took control of the media narrative during the weekend. Do you think that perhaps these protests, if they do happen, they will be as big as the January 6th protests? Or do you think that Trump supporters are savvy enough to know that they shouldn't go out and be so vocal and loud in a blue state like New York because of the way they were treated in Washington?
You know, absolutely. I think that the recent videos that resurfaced of Jake Angeli, who was actually led into the Capitol building on the January 6th protests by Capitol police officers, and that the media presented it as if he broke in violently and trespassed. This is part of it. I think that the Trump supporters have realized that, unfortunately, or for whatever it is, you know, the media has a duty and obligation to uphold the truth. And unfortunately, the media failed miserably, objectively speaking, in actually portraying an accurate depiction of what actually took place on January 6th. So I think those the recent footage that came out in support of what Angeli was saying, for example, and against what the media narrative was pushing, will dissuade a lot of protesters from coming out and perhaps thinking twice, 3 times before going into a building, even if they are being let in with open arms, because unfortunately, the tape is what always matters, and that can be tampered with, as we've seen on numerous occasions. So I don't think that the protest will be, to answer your question, as large or as clamorous as the January 6th protests were. And I honestly think that it's not a good idea for the protests to take place, because even if they are done in a calm and peaceful manner, there is always the option and the possibility that the media will twist it and turn it into something that's different than what's actually the reality on the ground.
Absolutely. And we don't know who's going to be infiltrated in those protests, as we saw on January 6th as well. Adele, it is such a pleasure to speak with you always. Thank you for that insight. And I look forward to speaking to you again very soon on WION. Thanks for joining us.
Likewise.
China's President Xi Jinping lands in Moscow, and we have the latest for you. He's set to hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Reports say that Beijing is attempting to broker peace and put an end to the war in Ukraine. The trip comes just 3 days after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin over alleged war crimes in Ukraine, including the deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. The Chinese president will be the first person to meet Putin since the arrest warrant was issued. Neither Moscow nor Beijing are members of the ICC. Ahead of Xi Jinping's visit, John Kirby, The White House National Security Council spokesman issued a statement. He accused China and Russia of chafing against the international rule-based order that the U.S. and its allies had set up after the end of the Second World War.
If, coming out of this meeting, there's some sort of call for a ceasefire, well, that's just going to be unacceptable, because all that's going to do, Mike, is ratify Russia's conquest to date. All that's going to do is give Mr. Putin more time to refit, retrain, reman, and try to plan for renewed offensives at a time of his choosing. We hope, and we've said this before, that President Xi will call and talk to President Zelensky, because we believe the Chinese need to get the Ukrainian perspective.
China is trying to achieve several different things with this trip, and it will be a tough balance. They do want to affirm the strategic partnership with the Russian Federation to show that America's attempts to split the relationship and make the relationship costly for China will not work. They want to show the developing world that they can play a constructive role. They want to avoid economic and reputational costs in Europe, so I think that they will be careful about how far they go in terms of signaling new support for Russia so that they're not seen as an enabler.
The two leaders are set to have lunch together on Monday and have informal talks. The Kremlin had confirmed that official dialogue between the presidents and officials of both countries will take place on Tuesday. The Kremlin spokesperson further confirmed that statements will also be given to the media after the meeting. Xi Jinping, before leaving for Russia on his 3-day visit, said that there is clear historical logic and strong internal driving force for growing China-Russia relations. He further said that in the past 10 years, Russia and China had come a long way in wide-ranging cooperation and made significant strides into the new era. Referring to the Ukraine crisis, Xi Jinping said China had all along upheld an objective and impartial position based on the merits of the issue and actively promoted peace talks. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Russia is grateful for China's balance line in connection with the events taking place in Ukraine, for understanding their background and true causes. He further said Russia welcomed China's willingness to play a constructive role in resolving the crisis. Last month, China published a 12-point plan for a political resolution of the Ukraine crisis. Last week, a senior Chinese diplomat also called for negotiations while talking to Ukraine's foreign minister. Xi Jinping expected to be a crucial mediator in the invasion of Ukraine. This is the first visit by the Chinese president since the invasion began in February 2022. Incidentally, this is also Xi Jinping's first foreign visit since he was handed an unprecedented third term as president of China. Beijing has emphasized its concern over the relentless year-long conflict between Russia and Ukraine. However, there's no confirmation yet on whether the Chinese president will hold talks with the Ukrainian president.
Xi makes journey of friendship to Moscow, a trip that he claims will forge a new chapter in Russia-China ties.
Both Russia and China already declared a relationship without limits.
Putin has high hopes from his good old friend. As the United States says, any call for a ceasefire by Putin and Xi would be unacceptable.
Reports also say that Beijing is attempting to broker peace and put an end to the war in Ukraine.
Xi's strong suit is that he's offering peace in a world where the U.S. is offering arms.
All eyes on the Moscow meeting as war rages on. WION continuous coverage.
North Korea's state news agency KCNA has reported that the country's military held a tactical drill for a nuclear counterattack over this weekend. This includes launch of a tactical ballistic missile tipped with a mock nuclear warhead. This comes after South Korea and Japan reported a launch of a North Korean short-range ballistic missile off the East Coast on Saturday. The launch was the latest in a series of missile tests in recent weeks. Still images of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his daughter were released, showing the leader walking through a forest as military officers accompanied them through. Kim, who oversaw the test, said that the exercise improved the military's actual war capability and heightened
我相信，在未来这些年内，在您的领导下，中国会进一步向前发展，并一定会完成您所部署的重要的国家发展目标。
Символично, что ровно 10 лет назад мы с вами здесь встречались, вы совершили свой первый визит в качестве председателя Китайской Народной Республики в России.
我们正好10年之前在此会见，我想这具有象征性意义。当时您是首一次以国家主席的身份访问俄罗斯。
За это время мы сделали существенные шаги в развитии наших отношений.
在10年之内，我们的双边关系也迅速向前发展，迈出了很大的一步。
Более чем в 2 раза увеличился наш торговый оборот.
我们的双边贸易额翻了一番。
So we're watching images of Russian President Vladimir Putin meeting Xi Jinping. We know that Xi Jinping, before leading for Russia on this 3-day visit, really said that there is just this clear historical logic and an internal driving force for this growing China-Russia relation. They've really expanded ties in recent months, and ever since this new term that Xi Jinping has taken up as China's president, it seems he seems more confident to post-COVID take international trips, and this is his first trip internationally, and he decided to take it to Russia and meet with the Russian leader in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And these are the visuals that we're seeing the two leaders meet. Now, there's growing concern here in the United States that this meeting is for China to provide Russia with lethal aid and for Russia to use that lethal aid against Ukraine. Both China and Russia have denied this. They say that the meeting will possibly surround talks for some sort of negotiated peace settlement, something the United States during the weekend said that any kind of peace settlement or ceasefire should not be accepted if it's coming from the Chinese side. So a lot of questions left unanswered on the nature of this meeting. But what's clear is that these two leaders are meeting at a critical time when the United States, on the one hand, is concerned about the future of the international rule-based order on the one hand, and the tug of war with Russia, China, and others hoping to take advantage of the situation in the war in Ukraine on the other.
В целом, наше взаимодействие на международной арене, безусловно, способствует укреплению основополагающих принципов мироустройства и многополярности.
总体上看，那么俄罗斯和中国在国际平台上的密切协作是有助于我们巩固世界多极化和基本的一些基础性的国际法原则。
Очень много вопросов в сфере экономического взаимодействия.
我们在经济领域也有很多事务可谈。
Но завтра мы сможем поговорить об этом с участием наших партнеров и коллег.
After this meeting, the Kremlin spokesman said that we are expected to hear a statement given to the media about what the two leaders talked about. How wide-ranging that statement will be is yet unclear. But the Kremlin did say that this official dialogue between the presidents and both countries, really what they will talk about will be mostly held on Tuesday.
可以以非正式的这种朋友的友好的气氛中讨论一些事情，交流交流。
Добро пожаловать.
再次热烈欢迎来到俄罗斯。
尊敬的普京总统，我也称你为我亲爱的朋友。
Уважаемый президент Путин, я всегда называю вас как моим дорогим другом.
我非常高兴能够应你之约，再一次访问。
Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi has received an invitation from Saudi King Salman to visit the kingdom. This comes just a few days after China brokered a peace deal between Riyadh and Tehran, which restored ties between the two countries 7 years after they were severed. Taking to Twitter, the Iranian president's deputy chief of staff for political affairs said that, and I'm quoting here, in a letter to President Raisi, the King of Saudi Arabia welcomed the deal between the two brotherly countries, further adding that Raisi has welcomed this invitation. This is the last time Iran's president visited Saudi Arabia. It was back in 2007. The deal is expected to see Shia majority Iran and mainly Sunni Muslim Saudi Arabia reopen their embassies and missions within 2 months and further implement security and economic cooperation deals which were signed more than 20 years ago. Apart from this, the diplomats of both countries have also agreed to hold a meeting. There are 3 locations for the talks that have been suggested. However, no specifics have been shared so far. Saudi Arabia had cut ties with Iran back in January of 2016 after demonstrations and demonstrators stormed its embassy in Tehran. That was after Riyadh had executed the prominent Shia Muslim cleric Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, who was convicted of terror-related offenses. Iran and Saudi Arabia are major oil-producing nations. Unlike Saudi Arabia, Iran has been facing global isolation with sanctions over its alleged nuclear program. A thaw in relations between the two regional rivals will also have serious implications on oil production and political stability in the Gulf region. That's all the time we have for WION Live Broadcast from New York City. I'm Susan Tehrani. Thank you so much for staying with us and watching. Don't go away. A lot more news and headlines are coming up next, only on WION. World is One.
Gravitas tells you stories which others won't. And tonight we will tell you about this new strategic map that is being drawn.
They say your enemy's enemy is your friend. Is that the foundation of the new defense bridge between India and America?
This is what separates us from others who claim to be telling you global stories that matter. In the last 3 days, WION has been traveling across Syria. You are in Latakia city right now. Tell us, what is the situation?